Poseidon offers Zagreus 16 boons to mix and match with 9 other gods for a total of over 100 boon combinations. So how are you going to choose the right one? Poseidon offers 16 solo boons that function around adding additional knockback to your attacks, slamming your enemies into walls and traps, and my personal favorite, farming resources. Boons taken from Poseidon to fill your basic ability slots add knockback to each of those abilities, with his call also adding movement speed and invincibility frames to Zagreus for its duration. Additionally, Poseidon has 5 buff boons that improve the damage of his knockback effects, 3 boons that improve the resource farming of your run, 2 boons that improve your call ability, and 1 general buff as well. In order to take one of Poseidon's buff boons, you need to first fill one of your basic slots with one of his core abilities. This chart from Heartfelt Peach shows which boons you need to take to unlock his buffs, except for Hydraulic Might, which doesn't actually have any prerequisites. Because Poseidon doesn't add an explicit effect like Doom or Weak to your attacks, and instead relies on player skill and positioning, he is one of the harder gods to use effectively. However, his knockback is extremely effective at clearing rooms, and beginners want to try and take him because he's going to increase their ability to do the most important thing in the game, farm resources. Now let's talk about Poseidon's build strategy. Focusing on Poseidon boons means that clearing non-boss rooms is a snap, so long as you take his knockback effects on the correct attacks. Consider the knockback has 2 main uses: breaking up large groups of enemies and isolating them from one another, and bullying a single enemy against the wall repeatedly. Both effects are situationally useful, and I find that knockback is best taken on the Stygius Nova Smash special attack, the Adamant Rails Bombard special attack, and the basic attacks of the Varatha Spear, Aegis Shield, and Coronat Bow. It's also good to take in your cast and dash slots as an auxiliary to your regular attacks. Let me know what attacks you like to take knockback on in the comments below. The attacks that I've named allow you to precisely move enemies around the battlefield, slamming them into walls when possible, or otherwise just dealing damage with your other attacks from a safe distance. Focusing on building Poseidon also gives you access to one of the best calls in the game. Not only does it make you impervious for its duration, it'll also do a good chunk of damage to anybody you hit, and it improves your movement speed to make sure you're going to hit as many enemies as possible. It also applies his knockback ability, meaning that it's going to scale from any other knockback buffs of his that you have collected up until that point. Poseidon also has what I consider to be a hidden passive buff. See, most gods have multiple ability trees that you can travel down when you collect their boons, or they have boons that are only ever rarely useful. Ares is a good example of what I'm talking about, since his basic and special attack apply Doom, which only has 2 dedicated buffs, and his cast and his dash create Blade Rifts, which have 3 dedicated buffs, in addition to his other 3 general buffs, which are situationally useful. Basically, this means that when you collect an Ares buff, you have a much smaller chance of getting the boon that you actually want that's going to make a noticeable effect to the attack that you're focusing on. You could even be offered basic boons of his that take you down an entirely different upgrade tree and that you aren't built into at all. On the other hand, Poseidon only has 1 ability tree with 5 buffs that drastically improve the damage and effectiveness of your 5 basic slots. Additionally, he offers you 3 farming boons, which are always great to take, 2 pretty good call buffs, and 1 middling general buff. This means that taking a second basic boon of his in one of your slots isn't a terrible idea, since all of your buff boons are going to affect both abilities equally. Just remember to maintain some sort of attack to help you deal with bosses. This means that every Poseidon boon you take is going to be helpful to your build. You're not going to have any small incremental effects. The buff boons are going to be immediately visible, and you can always double down on his abilities, or just take farming, because farming is always good. This is just another way that taking Poseidon boons improves the flexibility of your build, and why he's worth taking a closer look at, providing you can make the most out of the gameplay strategies that we'll be going over next. My name is Matt, by the way, for those of you who are new to the Maximus channel. My mission with this channel is to break down the systems and strategies that are going to help you get good at games, then present them to you in an easy to absorb video. If you're enjoying this video, please consider liking and subscribing, and if you have any questions about Hades, leave them in the comments below and I will answer them in the next video. I've also made a ton of other Hades beginner guides that you can find on my channel, as well as longer gameplay videos where I prove that the tips I'm recommending actually work. Now, on to Poseidon's gameplay strategies. Poseidon's main strengths are in clearing non-boss rooms by dealing wide AoE damage, knocking enemies into walls and traps, and breaking up groups of enemies so that you can pick them off one by one. While clearing rooms, you should focus on launching your large AoE attacks into groups of enemies, then focus on knocking enemies back into the nearest walls and keeping other enemies at a safe distance while you kill them one at a time. Generally, whenever I'm playing Poseidon, you'll see me isolate an enemy I want to bully, then repeatedly slam them into walls to quickly burst them down. Breaking Wave is currently my favorite buff boon for this playstyle since it creates a huge area of effect and deals a lot of damage to all enemies in the area. Since you're going to be bullying one enemy at a time, it can be good to take Dionysus, Demeter, or Ares on your other abilities since they will either maintain damage or critical debuffs on the enemies that you're ignoring. Poseidon's cast and dash are also surprisingly effective since you can use them to break up enemy groups or to selectively bully enemies around while you wail on them with your high damage attacks. Once you've maneuvered enemies between you and a wall, you can begin letting loose with the cast to knock them into the wall and force other enemies off your back, or dash in circles around your target to repeatedly slam them into the wall. Since Poseidon struggles against bosses and ranged enemies, it's good to pair his boons with high damage boss killers such as Dionysus, Demeter, and Zeus, depending on the weapon that you're using and your open slots. Athena is a good tertiary god to pick up so that you can equip Deflect to one of your abilities. This gives us an additional tool to handle ranged attacks, and generally, Deflect is an excellent ability to have. If you have other gods you like combining with Poseidon, let me know down in the comments below. Depending on your luck with boons, you can also easily pivot away from Poseidon as your main god and instead take farming boons and focus on building up other god powers, giving you a high degree of build flexibility. So in conclusion, Poseidon has one of the more difficult abilities to take advantage of, but he offers you a high degree of control over the battlefield and also a lot of flexibility in your build. As a beginner, we want to try and take Poseidon because he's going to give us farming boons that are going to make it so that you get stronger faster and can reach the end game and access the more interesting content. I would suggest that you use his cast and dash abilities early on to learn how his knockback effect works, while you take Athena to give you a little bit more defense and the best damage dealing god you can find for whatever weapon you're taking into the underworld. Remember that Poseidon's knockback effect is best on slower high damage attacks and AoE attacks, and is generally not worth taking on chaining melee strikes. Also remember that his focus buff boons that improve knockback improve the damage of all of his basic attacks, so taking one or two of those is a good way to clear pretty much any room you come across with no effort. Also remember that any knockback buff boon of his that you take will affect every single one of his attacks that you can take, so taking multiples is a good way to clear rooms really easily. Just remember that if you take multiple attacks from Poseidon, you also need a strategy to deal with bosses. This can either be high damage boons from other gods, or a selection of defensive boons as well. Overall, Poseidon's quickly becoming my favorite god to run. What do you guys think? Did I miss anything in this guide? Let me know in the comments below, and while you're down there, leave any questions you have for me about Hades and I will answer them in the next video. Thanks for watching, guys. If you found this video to be valuable and you learned something, please consider liking, subscribing, and ringing the bell. Thank you so much for your support. I will see you in the next video, and remember, there is no escape.